My wife blocked me during her girls' trip and left me with our triplets. What I did next shocked her. "You're not built for this, Saint. You never were." Those were the last words my wife said to me before she walked out the door with a carry-on bag and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She kissed each of our triplets on the forehead, smoothed her dress, and left. Just like that. No argument. No dramatic exit. Just those words hanging in the kitchen air like smoke that wouldn't clear. My name is Saint Pooh. I'm 34 years old. I'm a structural engineer, the kind of man who can look at a blueprint and tell you exactly where a building will fail under pressure. I have spent my entire career understanding load-bearing capacity, stress distribution, the precise point at which something solid becomes something broken. And yet, standing in my own kitchen at 6 p.m. on a Friday, watching my wife's cab pull away from the curb, I had no formula for what I was feeling. Ariana had been planning this girls' trip for 2 months. Miami. 4 days. Her and 3 of her closest friends. A trip she said she needed the way lungs need air. I hadn't argued. I wanted her to go. I told her that. What I didn't expect was the chill in her voice the morning she left, or the way she'd been pulling slightly inward for weeks leading up to it. Quieter at dinner, slower to laugh, looking at her phone with an expression I couldn't read, and told myself not to chase. I told myself marriages have seasons. I told myself she was tired. We had 3 babies under 2. Leia, Noe, and the youngest by 4 minutes, Bo. Tiredness was the weather we all lived in. The house felt different the second she was gone. Not empty, the triplets made sure of that, but tilted, like a room where someone has moved the furniture 2 inches and you can't identify why everything feels slightly wrong. By 8 p.m., I'd fed all 3, which took 45 minutes and left me with formula on my shirt, oatmeal in my hair, and the specific kind of chaos that only 3 simultaneous human beings under the age of 2 can generate. I reached for my phone to call Ariana, not because I was panicking, just to hear her voice, just to say, "Hey, we survived dinner," and that's when I saw it. The screen read, "You cannot reach this person." I stared at it. I called again, same message. I sent a text, undelivered. I checked the number. I checked everything a person checks when their brain refuses to accept the obvious. She had blocked me, my wife, the mother of my children, blocked. Before I could move, before I could even form a complete thought around what that meant, the baby monitor exploded. All 3, simultaneously, the kind of crying that doesn't ask for your readiness. I set my phone face down on the counter and walked toward the sound, and as I passed the hallway, something made me stop at Leia's crib, a corner of white paper barely visible beneath the edge of the mattress, folded tight like someone had pressed it flat with intention, like someone had placed it there wanting it to be found, but not too easily. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I had 3 babies who needed me more than I needed answers, but my hands were shaking as I reached into the crib. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. I didn't open the note until 1:47 in the morning. By then, all 3 babies were asleep on my chest in the wide rocking chair Ariana had insisted we buy before they were born. I'd thought it was too big at the time. That night, with Leia curled against my left shoulder, Noe across my ribs, and Bo tucked into the crook of my right arm like he'd been engineered to fit there, I understood exactly why she'd bought it. She always thought 3 steps ahead. That was the thing about Ariana. She prepared for everything except the conversations that mattered most. The house was completely quiet. That specific 2 a.m. quiet that feels less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. I reached carefully into my shirt pocket where I'd tucked the note hours earlier and unfolded it with one hand, moving slowly so I wouldn't disturb the babies. The paper was folded 4 times. Precise. Deliberate. Her handwriting, looped, slightly left-leaning, the way it always was when she wrote something she'd thought about too long. "Saint, if you find this, it means you're doing it alone. I'm sorry. I needed to know if you would." That was all. No, I love you. No explanation attached. No second page. Just those 2 sentences and the weight of everything they didn't say sitting directly on top of my sternum right where Noe's small head was resting. I read it 4 times. Then I folded it back along its original creases and held it in my closed fist and stared at the ceiling. I needed to know if you would. If I would what? Survive? Manage? Fall apart? I turned the sentence over the way you turn a stone, looking for what's underneath it, and what I found underneath it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something older and quieter. It was the specific ache of a person who realizes they have been watched, evaluated, measured by the one person in the world they believed was simply standing next to them. I thought about the last 6 months, the way Ariana had started pausing before answering simple questions, the way she'd go still sometimes when I walked into a room, like she was resetting something. I'd noticed. I'd filed it under exhaustion, under new parenthood, under the ordinary erosion that 3 babies and 2 full-time careers will grind into any marriage. I hadn't asked. That was my failure. I hadn't asked. At 6 a.m., running on no sleep with the particular delirium that makes everything feel slightly cinematic, I made a decision I knew I'd regret one way or another. I called Ariana's mother, Claudette. I explained as calmly as I could manage that Ariana had blocked my number, that I was alone with the triplets, that I simply needed to know she was safe. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then laughter, soft, the kind that isn't meant to be cruel but is anyway. "She always said you weren't ready," Claudette said, and then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding a dead phone for a moment that felt much longer than it was. On the counter beside me, 3 baby bottles needed washing. The high chair trays were still sticky from last night. Beau had somehow gotten his sock off in the night and was sleeping with one bare foot in the air at an angle that should have been uncomfortable but apparently wasn't. I looked at all of it. I looked at the note still folded in my fist, and something changed in my chest. Not loudly, not dramatically. It didn't feel like a decision being made so much as a direction being chosen. The way a river doesn't decide to move forward, it simply finds the lowest point and goes. I walked to the counter. I opened my laptop. I started searching for something I'd never searched for before. The screen light was blue and bright in the early morning kitchen, and I leaned close to it, reading carefully, and if anyone had been watching, they would have had no idea what I was looking for. I wasn't ready to explain it yet either, but I knew exactly what I was doing. At 6 a.m., I called Claudette, Ariana's mother, and explained everything. The block, the note, the 3 babies. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. She laughed, not loudly, not theatrically, just that quiet, dismissive exhale that women like Claudette deploy like a weapon. "She always said you weren't ready." Then the line went dead. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone long after the call ended. Claudette had spent 19 years married to a man who cheated openly, and she'd stayed silent the entire time, swallowed every suspicion, buried every confrontation, and called it dignity. Then she handed that same silence to Ariana like an inheritance, a gift wrapped in damage. Every time Ariana had a doubt in our marriage, she didn't ask. She watched, she waited, she tested. She'd learned from her mother that asking was weakness and endurance was love. I didn't know all of that yet. I just knew Claudette had laughed at me. I set my phone down, looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, unshaved, hollow-eyed, formula stain on my collar. Then I opened my laptop and started building a plan. I called my supervisor at 7 a.m. and took 4 days of emergency family leave. He'd watched me work through a broken wrist without a single complaint. He was completely speechless. Then I made 5 more calls. I ordered a specific grocery delivery. I rearranged the living room floor plan so I could see all 3 babies from one position. I downloaded 2 childcare apps and 1 meal planning app. And then I made the call that cost me the most, the one I'd been refusing to make for 3 years. I called my brother Dre. We hadn't spoken since I found out he'd secretly borrowed $4,000 from Ariana without telling me. She'd given it willingly and hidden it from me for 8 months. When I found out, I didn't yell. I just went quiet. And I stayed quiet. 3 years of silence that Dre had tried to break twice, and I'd refused both times. Calling him now wasn't weakness. I understood that in my bones. It was the first honest thing I'd done in a long time. The phone rang twice. Then his voice, cautious, careful, like a man who'd learned not to expect good news from a ringing phone. "Saint, I need you," I said. Please come. Dre arrived at 9 a.m. with a car seat, a cookbook, and zero judgment. He walked through the door, took one look at the chaos, formula on the counter, Noe in a mismatched outfit, Leia screaming from her bouncer, Bo somehow asleep through all of it, and he just rolled up his sleeves. He knew babies in a way I didn't understand yet. He moved through my kitchen like it was his own, warming bottles at the precise angle, repositioning Leia against his forearm until she stopped crying within 40 seconds. I watched him from the doorway and felt something shift behind my eyes. What I didn't know then was that Dre had spent a full year volunteering in a NICU after losing his own daughter, Preya, who lived 11 days. His wife left 6 months after that. The $4,000 he'd borrowed from Ariana wasn't for debt or gambling. It was for a headstone he couldn't afford. He'd been too ashamed to tell me the truth, and I'd been too wounded to ask. While Dre held Noe, he glanced toward the bedroom, then back at me. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. Ariana's passport was gone. He'd noticed, and now I had too. On day 2, running on 3 hours of broken sleep and something that felt dangerously close to clarity, I made a decision that surprised even me. I started filming, not for attention, not to perform suffering publicly, but because Ariana's note said I needed to know if you would, and I wanted her to see exactly what I did when she wasn't watching. 45 seconds, me with Bo strapped to my chest in the carrier, stirring oatmeal with one hand, reading a board book aloud to Leia and Noe, propped side by side against the couch. My voice unhurried, my eyes tired but present. The caption, Day 2, blocked, still here. I posted it and put my phone face down. By evening, it had 2.3 million views. By midnight, it was on 3 different news pages. I didn't look at any of it. I was too busy giving Bo a bath, which was its own catastrophe entirely. But somewhere in Miami, someone in the comments had found Ariana's personal account, had tagged her directly, had made sure she couldn't avoid seeing what her husband was doing alone at home with their 3 babies while she sat beside a pool. She saw it. I just didn't know that yet. Ariana was on a pool deck in Miami when her friend Jade handed her the phone without a single word. The video was already playing. 3 a.m. Saint at the rocking chair, all 3 babies draped across him, one tear dried on his left cheek that he clearly hadn't noticed. Still humming, still there, jaw set. Not performing strength, just exercising it, quietly, in an empty house, with no audience he thought would ever see. Jade said quietly, but with the weight of a verdict, "You blocked that man." The other 2 women said nothing. They didn't need to. Ariana watched the video twice. The second time, she turned the sound up. She could hear him humming something, a melody she recognized from somewhere deep and early in her life, a place she couldn't immediately name. Her throat closed around whatever she'd been about to say. She'd spent 6 months watching Saint from a distance, cataloging suspicions, constructing a case against him built entirely on a phone call she'd half heard through a closed garage door. She'd told herself she was being rational, careful. Sitting there in the Miami sun, phone in hand, she understood for the first time that she'd simply been afraid, and fear had dressed itself up as logic for so long she'd stopped checking its credentials. She unblocked me at 3 a.m. I was in the rocking chair again. Leia wouldn't settle without motion. When my phone lit up on the side table, one message. I saw it, then nothing for 3 full minutes. I sat with the phone in my hand and waited, rocking slowly, not typing anything back. Then she called. I answered on the second ring and kept my voice low because the other 2 had just gone down. Before she could speak, before whatever she'd rehearsed on the flight home could come out, she heard it through the phone. The humming, soft and rhythmic in the dark quiet of the house we built together. The Haitian lullaby her mother used to sing to her during thunderstorms. The one she'd mentioned once, half asleep on a random Tuesday 18 months ago, mid-sentence, then moved on as if she hadn't said it at all. She thought I hadn't registered it. I'd called her aunt 3 weeks later, asked her to hum it, recorded it on my phone, learned it note by note over 2 weeks because Leia only slept when she heard it, and I wanted Leia to sleep. On her end of the call, Ariana broke down completely. She took the first flight home, She'd rehearsed what she would say during the entire cab ride from the airport. Apologies, explanations, the careful architecture of a woman trying to justify something she already knew couldn't be justified. She'd built the speech brick by brick. She opened our front door and it dissolved entirely. The house was clean. Not surface tidied, clean. Deep cleaned. The kind of clean that requires intention and time, not just urgency. Leia, Noe, and Bo were fed and bathed and dressed in coordinated outfits. Dre was asleep on the couch with one arm over his eyes, and Saint was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee beside him, writing in a notebook with the focused stillness of a man who had found something in the last 4 days he hadn't possessed before. He looked up. He didn't say, "Do you know what I went through?" He didn't reach for the wound immediately and press it between them. He just said, "Sit down. I need to tell you about R." Ariana sat. Her carry-on was still on her shoulder. She set it down slowly, the way a person sets something down when they're not sure yet if they'll need to pick it back up. Saint slid a small velvet box across the table. Ariana looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then Saint talked. About Renata, a 58-year-old ring designer he'd commissioned 2 years ago. About the garage calls she'd heard and misread. About the overtime shifts and the hidden bank statements and the 2 years of careful, quiet saving. About the engraving he'd chosen for the inside of the band after changing his mind 4 times. Ariana opened the box. She read the inscription, "Still choosing you." She looked at her original ring, the $200 placeholder he'd bought the day he proposed, because he had nothing but the intention to give her everything eventually. 4 years she'd worn it without a single complaint. 4 years he'd been ashamed of it in a way he'd never admitted. She looked at him. "I thought you were leaving me," she whispered. "I was building toward you," he said. The kitchen was very quiet. Dre stirred on the couch. He registered the moment in the way people register sacred things, by making himself smaller within it. He picked up his jacket, but before he slipped out, he set something on the counter, a photograph. Face down. Then he was gone. After Ariana went to check on the babies, Saint picked up the photo, a small headstone, gray stone, simple edges, a single carved line of flowers along the border. Priya Drepu, 11 days, forever loved. On the back, in his brother's handwriting, the 4,000 was for her. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." Saint sat with the photograph for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold. Long enough to understand that he'd spent 3 years punishing a man for a grief he hadn't been trusted with, and that the reason Dre hadn't trusted him with it was because Saint had always held people at a precise and calculated distance and called that distance stability. His father had left when Saint was 9. No argument, no warning, just a missing jacket and an empty drawer one morning, and Saint had spent the next 25 years quietly building walls around himself and calling them foundations. He took out his phone, called Dre. No answer. He drove to the apartment, knocked. The door opened slowly. Dre looked at him. Saint looked at him. Neither of them had a speech prepared. Saint stepped forward. His brother stood still for exactly 1 second before something in him released entirely. Saint pulled him in and held on. 2 weeks later, Ariana posted a video. She sat in the kitchen, our kitchen, the same counter, the same light, and told the whole story without softening a single corner of it. The suspicion, the half-heard phone call, the silence she'd inherited from her mother and never examined, the note she hid under the mattress, the 4 days she spent testing a man who was spending those same 4 days proving something she never should have doubted. She showed both rings side by side. She talked about Claudette, about 19 years of swallowed questions dressed up as dignity, about learning to test instead of trust because no one had ever shown her that asking was safe. And then she held the new ring up to the camera, tilted it until the light caught the inside of the band, and she said, "I spent 4 years testing a man who spent 4 years choosing me. Don't be me. Ask your person. Just ask them." The video cut to Saint off to the side, completely unaware of the camera, holding all 3 babies at once with the particular unbothered competence of a man who had survived something and come out changed. 10 million views in 36 hours. But the comment that stopped everyone, the one that got pinned, shared, screenshotted across the internet, was simple. He learned her mother's lullaby. He was never leaving. He was always home. The bin.